Dave's podcast, episode 5. Princess Margaret, the Queen, shopping trolleys, yachts, and chainsaws. After I'd been at WG Church for a couple of years, Cook and Mowers had really taken off. We were selling much more mowers, chainsaws, strimmers. Occasionally, if we got really busy, I would go down and help Bernard in the workshop, strip down a few mowers, drain some oil, change some plugs, sharpen some blades, that kind of thing. I really enjoyed it, broke up the day, made it much more interesting. One day, we got a call from Black & Decker. Their headquarters was in Maidenhead. Black & Decker is kind of the poor man's Dyson, only they made things that people wanted and could afford. The Black & Decker Workmate, the hot air gun for stripping paint, drills and jigsaws. Black & Decker, a few years earlier, had taken over a company called McCulloch. McCulloch made petrol chainsaws and strimmers, but after a few years they decided it wasn't really for them. So they had a whole workshop of returns, things that people had sent back from guaranteed. There was various items, chainsaws, strimmers, that kind of thing. So they phoned us up and offered us a complete job lot for a couple of £100. So Bernard asked me if I minded helping him on my afternoon off. He said it'd make it worth my while. So we set off to Maidenhead and arrived there and filled up our van with various bits of chainsaw and strimmers. When the job was completed and we got back, Bernard said that I could choose anything from all the items there. I chose a McCulloch 610 16-inch chainsaw, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I hadn't actually used a chainsaw. I think the only time I'd actually ran a chainsaw if I happened to be working on one, and I started it up to test it. Well, nothing happened for a couple of weeks, and then one of our regular customers came in the shop and said, did we know anyone who could cut down a tree? Well, Terry immediately said, oh, David's just got a new chainsaw, he'll do it for you. So that Sunday I set off up Terry's Lane in Cookham to cut down my first tree. Luckily, I don't think it was very big, and I managed to do it without cutting any bits off me. So I think I charged him about £20, and I got the logs for free, so I loaded them in the back of the van. And I brought some heavy-duty sacks. Terry allowed me to put some out the front of the shop, and I sold them for £1 a bag. They proved very popular, but unfortunately I didn't have a regular supply of logs. I did one or two other small jobs. Then one day, a regular customer of ours, who was the caretaker at Moore Hall, which was a big marketing establishment, people came for training courses. He said he was after someone who would like to cut down some old elm trees. He couldn't pay them, but if they came on a Sunday, they were welcome to take away the logs. This seemed like an ideal solution. So I set off on Sunday to see what needed doing. The trees were in a hedge at the back of the grounds. There was an empty field behind them. Now, the trees were 150 feet tall and about 12 inches round, and very dead. But I'd never cut down a tree before. I'd seen it on telly. So I worked out a system. The field behind was empty, didn't seem to have anything in it. So I climbed over the fence. I tied a rope as high as I could up my chosen tree. I would then make a couple of cuts into the tree until it became a little bit wobbly. Then I would walk to the end of the rope and pull it as hard as I could. Now, it wasn't a great idea. Obviously, occasionally the tree came down towards me and I had to run either to the left or the right to avoid being hit by it. But it seemed to work quite well. I would then cut the trunks of the tree into manageable pieces, carry them back and throw them back over the fence. I would then put the manageable pieces on a saw horse that I'd brought and then saw them into log-sized pieces. This was really hard work because I'd have to saw it, put the chainsaw down, move the log along, and then saw it again. So after a few weeks, I approached my sister and said if she wanted to earn a bit of money, she could help me on a Sunday. So the first time we went out, so by then I'd got quite a few orders for logs. So I would load up, we would chop down a tree, chop it all up, load up the van, and then go off within Cookham and deliver it. I remember we went to this one house, so we would then turn up there, back the van where they wanted them, and stack the logs up. It was really cold November, and my sister had a woolly hat on and a coat all done up and everything. And after we'd finished, the person there said, "Oh, here you are," and gave my sister £1. "Here you are, laddie. Thanks very much for helping." My sister's never let me forget it. So Terry let me write out an advert and put in the shop. So most Sundays I would have about 3 different orders, which is about as much as I could do in the time. I remember then this lady came in who was a regular customer, lived in the lodge house by Holy Trinity Church. Said, I need a load of logs, but I'll need them for 2 weeks' time. You can't let me down. You can't let me down. Margaret's coming. Margaret's coming, you know. I said, no, that'll be fine. I'll do them on Sunday. Oh, good. You won't let me down because Margaret's coming, you know. Margaret's coming. Okay, no, that'll be fine. When she'd gone, I turned to Terry and I go, what is she on about? Who is this Margaret? And it turned out it was Princess Margaret. She was in her circle of friends at the time, and Princess Margaret was coming to stay for the weekend. So I was making logs for royalty. It was around this time we had a phone call from an even higher royal. We had a phone call from the Clerk of Works at Windsor Castle. They wanted someone to repair their mowers, and I'd seen our advert. So a few days later, I set off my van to Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle was a lot different in those days. You could go through the gate at any time on a Sunday and have a wander around the grounds. Quite often, if we had someone over, we would go to Windsor and we could walk round the grounds, and it was something nice to do. These days, you have to pay to go into the grounds or anywhere, and they've got large electric bollards out the front. On this day, I just drove up to the gate. I think there might have been one policeman on duty. Stopped me. I said, I need to see the Clerk of Works. I drove through the yard, past St George's Chapel, and up to this big tower. Knocked on the door and saw the Clerk of Works. The mower they wanted repaired was a 2-stroke fly mow, one of the biggest fly mows that they do. The fly mow was the mower with the air that hovered. The mower was used to cut the grass on the bank of the very steep centre of Windsor Castle. So they would lower the mower down on a rope and pull it backwards and forwards on a rope to cut that grass in the middle. So you didn't know how they did that, did they? But we did quite a few mowers like that, but we never got the royal patronage of by royal command. Terry Comerford was a Rotarian, which meant he would disappear one lunchtime a week and have dinner with various businesses around the area. They also did a lot for charity. It was decided that they would open up a road tract. Road tract was the younger wing of the organisation for people between the ages of 18 and 30. I remember going to the inaugural meeting in Bourne End. It was a large group of people that had never met each other. But basically we started a road tract which involved having a president, a vice president. We would meet once a week somewhere in Bourne End. We would have a charity that we would work for throughout that year. So I think we did blind dogs, not blind dogs, guide dogs for blind, which is much better than blind dogs. And we would do discos, barn dances. But there was road track organisations throughout the area. So there'd be someone in High Wycombe, Slough, Langley, Windsor. So it meant that once it got going and we'd started our club, we could then go to these various meetings. So it meant we had a much bigger social life. Every sort of Saturday there was either a disco on somewhere or a barn dance somewhere, and it was really good. So we started off our charity, as I say, was the Guide Dogs for the Blind. So we decided that we would do a sponsored shopping trolley race from Bourne End to Cookham. So we approached Tesco's to say, could we borrow half a dozen shopping trolleys? Oh no, they said, you couldn't do that. So we approached Asda. There wasn't the supermarkets around that there are today. So in the end, we had no option. We then went to Tesco's in Maidenhead, turned up in the dead of night with Trevor Scott's van, and proceeded to steal 6 shopping trolleys. But luckily in those days there was no CCTV or anything like that. So we just drove up, selected 6 good-looking shopping trolleys, lifted them in the back of his van, and went off with them. On the day of the race, we'd sold sponsorship, which we'd stuck on the side of our trolleys. And then we raced from Bourne End to Cookham. I actually won the race, which was quite amazing. But we raised quite a lot of money. Another thing we did once, we did a Guinness Book of Records day, and we were donated an upright piano from Pinder Hall, and we wheeled it down across the railway down to Church Hall, and then proceeded to smash it up with sledgehammers, and we had to pass it through an 18-inch hole. We started off really well, but then all the wire and the strings on that got in the way, and we got nowhere near the Guinness Book of Records. But around this time, I met my first serious girlfriend. It was through Road Tract. We were running a disco in Bourne End, and she'd come along. She was in the Henley group. We arranged to meet the following week, and I went to pick her up in Henley. She told me roughly where her road was, and she said, "Oh, you'll recognise my house, because it's got a boat in the front garden." Well, I thought she meant like a small rowing boat or a boat on a trailer. When I got there, it was a full ocean-going yacht. Her dad was fitting it out, ready to go down to Mallorca in the summer. Unfortunately, we split up about 2 weeks before this was due to happen. She worked in Barclays in Henley, but I was never bank manager material. Another story I ought to tell you is, do you remember the old Black Avenger that I'd brought? Well, I was in the process of respraying it, so I was stripping down the paint off it and respraying it sky blue. Well, I'd been to Henley to see this girl, and they told us that it was going to snow that day. It started snowing Sunday afternoon, so I left it far too long. And by the time I went to go home, I drove through Henley, and you go up a hill and it's like wooded either side, and then you come out over Remenham Hill, where it's completely clear and open fields. As soon as I got out into these open fields, the snow had driven and was about 3 foot high. The car just ran into the snow and stopped. It wouldn't start again, and as I say, was completely stuck. So I left it there and started walking back to Henley. I was walking down the hill. A few cars would come up and then endeavour to turn round because the road was now blocked. Luckily, one man stopped and offered me a lift back down to Henley. By this time, the road was really treacherous, and I remember we actually slipped off the road, hit a tree, bounced off, and he just carried on driving because he knew if he stopped, we were going to be stuck there. So he dropped me off back into Henley, and I walked back out to this girl's house, and her dad gave me a lift home. The next day, the police turned up at WG Church and said, "I've got to go up to Henley and move my car." I don't know quite how they knew that I worked at churches. Whether they contacted my mum and she must have given them the address. And I went up to collect the car. Bernard drove me up in the van, and the car had been dug out by the snow plough, and the snow was by this time was 6 foot high around the car, and there was a little 2 foot gap either end. I had to get in the car and drive backwards and forwards until I could ease out of this square space. Unluckily, someone had ran into the back of the car, so it was had now, apart from being multicoloured, it now had a dent in the back as well. It was around this time that I started looking for a new job. I think it was driven a lot by this girl, where I thought I needed to earn a bit more money if I was going to move to Henley. She loved the Henley Regatta. She was friends with George Harrison's nephew. It was really a different circle of friends, but it was never going to work out. This was a Just the Ticket production.